has joined the Pan-African Payment and Settlement System, PAPS, to boost the intra-African trade. The CBE have said that the move will encourage banks operating in Egypt and also African banks in order to join the system and stimulate cross-border financial transactions with one another. Details in the following report.
The Central Bank of Egypt has endorsed the Pan-African Payment and Settlement System (PAPS) agreement to enhance regional banking relations and economic collaboration with African countries. The PAPS, created by the African Export-Import Bank Afreximbank, streamlines cross-border payments and trade, cutting costs and processing times. This initiative aims to boost economic ties and enhance trade between Egypt and other African nations. Rami Abu Naga, Deputy Governor of the CBE, emphasized that joining this initiative highlights Egypt's commitment to strengthening global and African economic relations. The PAPS membership includes 14 central banks from Nigeria, Ghana, Liberia, Guinea, Gambia, Sierra Leone, Djibouti, Zimbabwe, Zambia, Kenya, Rwanda, Malawi, Tunisia and Comoros, as well as over 50 commercial banks. The CBE will oversee the involvement of banks working in the system to enhance intra-African trade, strengthen economic ties with African nations, and promote financial integration.
Well, to shed more light on this, we have the pleasure to have with us over the phone our dear guest, His Excellency Ambassador Ayoub, Mahmoud Ayoub, Plenipotentiary Minister Commercial. Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon to you and to the viewers.
Sir, the Central Bank CBE have joined the Pan-African Payment and Settlement System PAS in order to boost the intra-African trade. How did you see this?
This is a very important step by the Central Bank of Egypt to increase trade with the African countries and at the same time to create stability and safety of transactions, commercial transactions. That is very important and will make it very easy for the commercial banks in Egypt to deal more with the commercial banks in African countries. That is very important for both parties, whether for African countries or for Egyptian companies, to increase their presence in the African continent. That is very important from economic and trade point of view.
So, Your Excellency, Ambassador Ayoub, how can the deal boost the economic ties and also enhance the trade between Egypt and other African nations? Hello? Hello?
Ayoub.
Hello, can you hear me, Your Excellency?
Yes, I can hear you.
Hello?
Yes, I can hear you.
Yes, would you like that I repeat the question?
Yes, please.
Yes, okay. Your Excellency, Ambassador Ayoub, how can this deal boost the economic ties and also enhance the trade between Egypt and other African nations?
This is a very important question. Why? Because in many cases I have been in trade with African countries. I have been posted to African countries for several years, whether in East Africa or West Africa. Trade with the African countries, one of the main problems and obstacles we faced, and now it is being solved, is how to clearing transactions between the central bank, commercial banks in both parties. So for Egypt to participate in this system, so are giving a green light for the Egyptian commercial banks to increase their presence, that is to say, increase their transactions, that is to say, to increase Egyptian export to African countries, and at the same time encourage imports from African countries instead of having intermediaries from Europe or from America. So that is a very important step to increase the inter-African trade, and at the same time it will impact the economic progress, economic stability and economic welfare in Egypt and the African countries who take part in it. There are 14 African countries, central banks in this system, and about 55 commercial banks, this will be need, this will need to be increased in other African countries. 14 countries are small, still small number, but they are big countries like Egypt and Nigeria, Ethiopia, and other countries. So we need to explore new ways of clearing transactions in commercial transactions, in commercial relations with African countries, and that is the best way to do it.
Yes, Your Excellency, how would you describe the need of African nations to boost the intra-continental trade?
In many cases, we find that they don't know enough. When the banks step in and pave the way for commercial transactions and trade between countries, that is a very important step, because we need to know, and now we can know through our commercial banks, whether in Egypt or in these 14 African countries. We have 53 African countries, by the way. So we need to know more about African countries, and once we know more, we find many opportunities in increasing the trade, inter-African trades, and at the same time minimizing the cost, and at the same time securing stability and
so, Your Excellency,
stability.
Yes, how are the international and also the regional developments impacting the trade among African nations?
International relations are very complicated, and at the same time they are sensitive. When we see exodus from many countries from the dollar zone, we find that they refer to their own currencies, and this is one of the main points in inter-African trade through African Export and Import Bank, and that is a very important step to increase trade between African countries in their own local currencies, which is make it easier for import and export, and at the same time increasing the stability of these countries and minimizing the pressure on the dollar reserves of these countries.
Yes, Your Excellency, Ambassador Ayoub, how do you see the prospects for the success of the African Continental Free Trade Agreement and also the pace by which it is proceeding?
The prospects are high and very big. Why? Because most of the foreign trade of African countries, the last century at least, was done through Europe and the European companies or the whole colonized African countries. Now, when we are dealing directly, we are minimizing the cost and at the same time securing security for the transaction, at the same time cutting the expenses and time, and this will encourage more entrants to come in and boost trade between countries, because they find it more easy and less costly, and at the same time it is safe and secure.
Yes, so with the emerging economic blocks, like for example the BRICS, how do you see Africa's chances in order to become a global economic heavyweight?
African countries now are grouping together, and they will be an important bloc in the international. Egypt is a part of the BRICS, which contains now have 26 members, and at the same time it is an integral part of the African continent and in most of the African groupings. When we increase our presence in these blocks, I will call it blocks at the moment, it will increase the prospects for the Egyptian economy, and at the same time increase the relations with African countries. When I say relations, it will bilateral, multilateral, trilateral relations with African countries, when the Egyptian companies can have access to African markets through this intermediary, and at the same time it will cut their cost. The cost is a very important component when we come to it, and that is why when Egypt joined this BTS, it is very important for Egypt and for African countries at the same time, and it will bolster and boost trade between African countries instead of having third-party intermediary.
Yes, so Your Excellency Ambassador Ayoub, what are the obstacles that are hindering a swift advance of intra-African trade?
The main hindrance is what the clearing of transactions, because they depended on dollars, and at some point the dollars were not available in the coffers of these central banks. So when we deal in our own local currencies, this will remove a big obstacle in trade between African countries. That is, we can double and triple trade between African countries, and inter-African trade will be boosted in this way by having a direct contact between central banks of Africa in their own local currencies, which is very important for the African countries, whether they have reserves, foreign reserves or not.
Yes, I thank you very much for your time. Thank you for your valuable information. Your Excellency Ambassador Ayoub, Mahmoud Ayoub, Plenipotentiary Commercial, thank you very much for joining us over the phone. Well, Cairo have hosted the second roundtable of the African Forum Environmental Protection Agencies. The event brought together the leaders of the African environmental agencies, UN officials and experts in order to share the experiences, promote best practices, and also tackle the common environmental challenges. We have more in the following report.
Roundtable of the African Forum of Environmental Protection Agencies, AFEPA, in Cairo. The event was organized by CIDAR in collaboration with the UNEP Regional Office from the 3rd to the 5th of December. The forum brought together leaders of African environmental agencies, UNEP accredited diplomats, and experts to share experiences, promote best practices, and tackle common environmental challenges. During the meeting, Yasmin Fuad emphasized the importance of integrating scientific knowledge into actionable policies to drive sustainable development. She highlighted Egypt's achievements in renewable energy and the integrated coastal zone management plan as examples for successful policy implementations. She also called for greater regional cooperation to share knowledge and best practices, aiming to elevate Africa's environmental leadership. The gathering also addressed the urgent issue of plastic pollution, aligning with global discussions in South Korea on the creation of a binding agreement to combat plastic pollution. A key highlight of the forum was the launch of AFEPA's digital platform, developed by CIDAR, aimed at improving communication and knowledge exchange among African environmental protection agencies.
Well, children in the Democratic Republic of the Congo are still awaiting vaccines in order to protect them from Mpox. Health officials said this is the case even as case numbers among this bracket soar. The details in the following report.
Mpox is just one of numerous challenges facing the DRC, where 5.6 million people have been internally displaced as a result of conflict, mainly in the east of the country. There, a lack of basic water, sanitation and health facilities has also given rise to other disease outbreaks such as cholera and measles. Soaring rates of Mpox in the DRC and its spread to neighboring countries prompted the WHO to declare the outbreak a public health emergency of international concern in August this year, a status upheld at a WHO meeting last month. Hopes were raised with the start of an Mpox vaccination campaign in eastern DRC in October, but vaccines have been slow to arrive and children remain completely excluded. Between the 14th of August, the day of the WHO announcement, and the 3rd of November, the number of child cases of Mpox in DRC more than doubled, from around 11,300 to 25,600, according to Save the Children and NGO. Some babies are also being born with Mpox after being infected by the mother during pregnancy. Adding to the vulnerability of children of the disease are widespread malnutrition, promiscuity, the presence of other infectious diseases, limited access to health care, and an overwhelmed and weakened health system.
Well, with this, my dear viewers, we come to the end of this episode of our program Africa Today. My name is Alan Mukhtar. Thank you for watching.